Sherry, get your worthless ass out from that car! I know you're hiding!
Honestly, I didn't know the man in that obsidian sedan was the most dangerous crime lord in the city. I only knew that the man chasing me with a shotgun had just screamed the word worthless before firing into the rain-soaked alley behind me. If the idea of trading a petty monster for a sleeping dragon makes your pulse quicken, hit that like button. Subscribe right now and tell us your city and the time you're watching, because the choice Sherry makes in the next 10 seconds changes her life forever. My knuckles were finally healing, the split skin starting to itch, a constant reminder of the time I'd let the dinner rolls burn by 2 minutes. That was my life with Kelvin L. Ecker, a minefield of invisible rules where breathing too loudly could cost me a rib. I stayed for 5 years because Kelvin convinced me I was a liability, that my size made me unlovable, and that the world outside our door would be even crueler to a woman like me than he was. I stayed until yesterday rainy afternoon, when I found the manila folder hidden in his truck. It was full of text exchanges with men I didn't know. Men discussing dollar amounts. Discussing me. He wasn't just going to hurt me this time. He was going to sell me to settle his gambling debts with the Iron Lotus Syndicate. That was the catalyst. The sheer cold terror overrode 5 years of psychological conditioning. I ran with nothing but my phone and the clothes on my back, escaping our suffocating apartment on the east side. I made it 6 blocks before I heard his pickup truck engine roaring through the rain, hunting me. Panic strips you of logic. I dove into the underground parking garage of the Cordelia Hotel, a place way out of my league, praying the shadows and the rain would swallow me whole. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. Kelvin's truck echoed off the concrete pillars, getting closer. The shotgun blast against a support beam told me he wasn't bluffing anymore. I was trapped. That's when I saw it, a polished black sedan with tinted windows, its rear door slightly ajar, parked in a reserved executive spot. I didn't think. I just dove inside, tumbling onto the plush leather floor, curling into the smallest shape I could manage. I wedged myself between the front and back seats, trembling. I smelled expensive leather, faint cigarette smoke, and something metallic, like gun oil. I lay there, heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the garage sounds. Rainwater dripping. I waited for the driver to scream, to throw me out, to hand me over to the man who viewed me as currency. Instead, there was only a terrifying, heavy silence. "You're bleeding on my floor," a voice said. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of an executioner's blade. I looked up, trembling. In the corner of the seat, cloaked in shadows that seemed to move with him, sat an handsome Korea man. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than my life, his hands resting calmly on his knees. He didn't look startled. He took in my tear-streaked face, my soaked jacket, the sheer terror vibrating off me. He didn't look at me with disgust the way Kelvin did. He looked at me like I was a problem that had suddenly become interesting. Before he could speak, a shadow fell over the car window. My blood turned to ice. Kelvin. He was outside, shotgun in hand, his face twisted with rage. He couldn't see through the tinted glass clearly, but he knew I was nearby. He started banging on the window with the butt of the gun, shouting obscenities that were muffled by the sedan's soundproofing, but I knew every word by heart. I whimpered, a pathetic sound that escaped before I could stop it. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable. "Sherry. Get your worthless ass out here. I know you're hiding." Kelvin circled the car, his fury escalating with each unanswered threat. I heard him move toward the front, probably looking for a better angle. Then silence. The kind of silence that felt like the air had been sucked out of the garage. I dared to lift my head just enough to see Kelvin's face through the gap between the seats. He was staring at the front license plate, his face draining of color. The shotgun in his hands began to lower, trembling. The plate read, Dragon King. 2 men materialized from the shadows behind him, their black suits pristine despite the rain, their faces blank. Kelvin stumbled backward, mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. The stranger above me reached down, his large hand hovering for a second before gently, almost hesitantly, resting on my trembling shoulder. It wasn't aggressive. It was a weight. A grounding force. "He will not touch you again," he whispered, the promise vibrating through his hand into my bones. Then he looked out at Kelvin, who was now being surrounded by men in dark suits. A cold, sharp smile touched his lips. He tapped the partition glass and uttered one word: "Drive." The car surged forward, smooth and silent as a predator. As we swept past Kelvin, who was currently being forced to his knees by the men, the stranger leaned closer, his scent of sandalwood and steel filling my senses. "Take a breath," he commanded softly. "I'll protect you." The car glided through Seoul's rain-slicked streets with barely a whisper, its leather interior so pristine that I was afraid to breathe too deeply, as if I might contaminate it. I sat rigid in the back seat, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling, hyper-aware of the stranger profile illuminated by passing street lights. He hadn't spoken since they left the garage. Hadn't looked at me. His silence was nothing like Kelvin's. There were no threats coiled beneath it, no promises of punishment, but that somehow made it worse. I didn't know what it meant. I was being taken from one cage, I knew, but I had no idea the kind of gilded fortress I was entering. I looked up at the man who had just saved me. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw set, looking like a king who had just acquired a new, troublesome territory. We drove for 40 minutes in absolute silence. I was too terrified to move from the floorboards, my body aching from the tension. Eventually, the car slowed and descended deeper underground. The rain-streaked darkness outside the tinted windows was replaced by harsh artificial brightness, the kind of sterile, expensive lighting that said private property. When the car finally stopped, the door opened, and his hand was there again. Not demanding this time. Offering assistance. I crawled out, my knees weak and shaking. I felt a deep burning shame about my disheveled state, my soaked clothes. I stood up and finally looked at my savior fully. He was devastatingly handsome, high cheekbones, a sharp jawline, and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 violent secrets. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, but his energy was ancient, battle-hardened. He was Lee Hyun. I would learn that name later, whispered with fear by powerful men across 3 continents. We were in the private underground garage of a penthouse tower that pierced the city skyline. It was sterile, bright, and secure, like a vault. 2 other men in dark suits were waiting by an elevator. They bowed low, a full 90 degrees, when Lee Hyun emerged. They barely glanced at me, as if my presence was already expected, already managed. "June, take her to the guest suite in the East Wing," Lee Hyun ordered one of the men in Korean. Then he switched to perfect, slightly accented English for me. He looked me right in the eye. "You are safe here. No one enters this building without my permission. And no one leaves with my property." Property. The word chilled me to the bone. Yet strangely, it didn't terrify me the way it would have coming from Kelvin. With Kelvin, being property meant being a punching bag, something to be used, degraded, and discarded. But when Lee Hyun said it, the word felt different. Dangerous, yes, but also protective. Like he was claiming responsibility, not ownership. I didn't know it yet, but I had just traded a cage for a kingdom. And the man who ruled it had no intention of letting me go. The glass elevator climbed through the night sky like a crystal bullet, the city shrinking beneath us with every floor. I pressed my back against the wall, still trembling, my reflection fractured across the mirrored panels. June stood beside me, hands clasped professionally behind his back, his expression neutral. "The penthouse has 3 wings," he said, his English precise. "Mr. Lee occupies the north. You'll have the east. No one will disturb you there." I wanted to ask what happened in the West Wing, but my voice had retreated somewhere deep inside my chest. The doors whispered open on the 47th floor. Double doors of dark wood swung inward, revealing a suite that made my breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the glittering city like a painting. The bed was enormous, dressed in silk that looked like it cost more than everything I'd ever owned. I took one hesitant step inside, then another, feeling like an intruder. The closet door stood ajar. I pulled it open and froze. Rows of clothes, dresses, pants, sweaters, all in my size. Exactly my size. How did he know? I reached out to touch the silk bedding, then jerked my hand back, afraid my fingers would leave marks. You flinch when you move. I spun around. Lee stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit, his presence filling the space without him stepping inside. His eyes tracked my movements with that same clinical assessment from the car. Like you're afraid of taking up space, he continued. My throat tightened. I don't want to be in the way. He stepped closer, stopping just inside the threshold. Here, you are allowed to take up space. This is the first rule. Before I could respond, he turned and left, the door closing with a soft click. I stood alone in the vast room, the silence pressing against my ears. After a moment, I walked into the bathroom, all marble and gold fixtures, and stared at the enormous tub with its gleaming jets. My hands shook as I turned on the water. I sank into the bath once it filled, the heat soaking into my bones. That's when it all crashed over me, the shotgun, the rain, the terror, the escape. For 5 years, I had made myself smaller, quieter, less. I had learned to disappear in plain sight, to apologize for breathing. Here, in this palace of glass and steel, I didn't know how to be anything else. The tears came silently, mixing with the bathwater, and I let them fall. The next morning, the car glided to a stop in front of Maison Lavelle Boutique, its gold-lettered sign gleaming against pristine white marble. I stared at the window displays, mannequins draped in fabric that probably cost more than a year's rent. What are we doing here? I can't afford. You're not paying. Lee's tone left no room for argument. Walk inside. The staff recognized him immediately, bowing so low I thought their spines might snap. A manager in a tailored suit rushed forward, all smiles and deference. But it was the junior clerk, Jenny, according to her name tag, whose eyes raked over me with unconcealed disdain. I tried to ignore her, moving toward a rack of simple dresses, but her voice carried across the boutique floor, deliberately loud. Why is Mr. Lee wasting his time on that? She glanced at another clerk, smirking. She doesn't even fit our sample sizes. The words hit like a physical blow. I froze, heat flooding my face, every insecurity Kelvin had carved into me roaring back to life. My hands trembled as I pulled them away from the fabric. Lee's expression didn't change. But his eyes went cold, the kind of cold that made the temperature drop. Fire her, he said to the manager, his voice flat. Now. The manager's smile faltered. Mr. Lee, she's new, she didn't mean. I don't care. Lee turned his full attention to the manager, and the man actually took a step back. Fire her, or I buy this store and fire all of you. Jenny's face went white. 2 security guards appeared as if summoned, escorting her out while she stammered apologies that no one acknowledged. The boutique fell silent except for the click of her heels fading into the street. Lee looked at me. Choose anything you want. Everything. My hands were still shaking as I selected one modest dress, navy blue, simple, safe. Lee watched me for a moment, then turned to the manager. Box everything in her size. Deliver it to the penthouse. Sir, that's half the inventory. Lee slid a black card across the counter. Then send a bill for the other half. I'm buying the store. I stared at him, speechless, as the staff erupted into frantic activity. In the car, the silence pressed against my chest. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. His voice was quiet, final. No one disrespects what's mine. The word jolted through me. I'm not yours. Lee turned, his dark eyes holding mine. Then why are you still here? I opened my mouth, but no words came. The answer lodged somewhere between gratitude and terror, and I couldn't untangle them. He turned away, watching the city pass, and I sat in silence, wondering the same thing. The office smelled of leather and old wood, books lining the walls floor to ceiling like sentries guarding secrets. Sherry had wandered in looking for Lee, thinking maybe he'd retreated here after their awkward dinner conversation. The house felt too large when he disappeared into its corners. The ledger sat open on his mahogany desk, innocent as a checkbook. She moved closer, drawn by the familiar shape of Kelvin's name in bold typescript. Her heart stuttered as her eyes tracked down the page. Line items in neat columns, clinical and devastating. $340,000. Iron Lotus Syndicate. Debt transferred to Lihian Enterprises. Her vision blurred at the final notation, written in red ink that might as well have been her blood. Asset, Sherry H. Braden acquired. The leather binding creaked as she lifted it with shaking hands, searching for context that would make this mean something else. Anything else? You weren't supposed to see that. Lee's voice came from the doorway, quiet and maddeningly calm. She whirled, the ledger clutched against her chest like a shield. You bought me? He stepped inside, closing the door with the careful precision he brought to everything. His expression remained neutral, businessman discussing quarterly reports. I paid your debt. There's a difference. You paid Kelvin to own me. The words tore from her throat, years of survival instinct screaming that she'd traded one prison for another, one keeper for the next. I paid Kelvin so he couldn't sell you to someone else. Each word landed with surgical precision, cutting through her rising panic. He moved to his chair and sat, hands steepled beneath his chin like a man negotiating terms. The Iron Lotus Syndicate was going to traffic you. They were going to ship you overseas. You would have disappeared, no trace, no rescue, nothing. Sherry's laugh came out jagged and broken. So you made me your property instead? I made you safe. She hurled the ledger at him. It struck his chest and tumbled to the floor, pages splaying open like broken wings. You didn't save me. You bought me like livestock. Something flickered in his eyes, frustration, maybe anger, definitely incomprehension. He rose, voice still controlled but edged with steel. Would you rather I left you in that parking garage? Would you prefer I let Kelvin drag you into a shipping container? I'd prefer to be free. The sob caught in her throat, choking her. Lee's jaw tightened. You were never going to be free. Not from him. Not from that debt. He turned toward the door, shoulders rigid. I gave you the only freedom you were ever going to get. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving her alone with the ledger and the price of her salvation. It is a bright day in a new week. Director Sook arrived like winter itself, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, wrapped in a suit. Lee had warned her about the meeting, told her to stay upstairs, but she'd insisted on being useful. Playing hostess felt less suffocating than hiding in her bedroom like contraband. She served tea with hands that had finally stopped shaking, at least until Sook's gaze tracked her movements like a predator watching prey circle the watering hole. So this is the girl. Sook's voice dripped condescension as he accepted the cup without looking at her. Kelvin's cast off. I heard you paid a fortune for damaged goods, Lee. Lee's expression remained carved from ice. Your concern for my investments is touching. Sherry retreated toward the kitchen, but Sook's next words stopped her cold. Do you know why he really took you, sweetheart? Sook leaned back, supremely comfortable in his cruelty. You were engaged to a man who owed the Iron Lotus. By taking you, Lee Hyun made it personal. He paused, savoring the moment. He didn't save you. He used you to start a war. The teapot trembled in Sherry's grip, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Lee's silence felt like confirmation, heavy and damning. That's enough, Sook. Is it? Sook smiled. Or is the truth finally catching up to your pretty fiction? The moment Sook's car disappeared down the driveway, Sherry stormed into Lee's office. He sat behind his desk, reviewing contracts as though the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Is it true? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Did you only take me to start a fight with the Iron Lotus? Lee's pen stilled. He didn't look up. Yes. The word hit like a physical blow. So I'm just a pawn? Finally, he met her eyes. You were a pawn. Now you're a complication. What does that mean? She hated how her voice wavered, hated that she wanted an answer that would make this bearable. Lee stood, moving around his desk with deliberate grace. It means I took you to send a message. But keeping you? He stopped close enough that she could see the dark circles under his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights she hadn't noticed. That's not strategy. That's choice. Why? Something flickered in his expression, possession, protection, something rawer than either. Because I don't let go of what's mine. The declaration should have terrified her. Instead, it anchored something loose and desperate inside her chest, even as she hated herself for wanting it to. That night, Lee found her on the balcony, silhouetted against the city's glittering sprawl. She didn't turn when his footsteps approached, but her shoulders tensed with awareness. Come with me. His voice was quieter than usual. There's something you need to see. He led her through hallways she'd never explored, to a room that felt different from his sleek office, warmer, cluttered with photographs and heirlooms that spoke of family and history. Personal in a way Lee never was. The leather ledger sat on a metal tray in the center of his desk. Sherry's breath caught. What are you doing? Lee pulled a silver lighter from his pocket, flicking it open with practiced ease. Ending this. The flame kissed the corner of the ledger. It caught immediately, pages curling and blackening, Kelvin's name disappearing into ash and smoke. Sherry watched transfixed as $340,000 and the word acquired dissolved into nothing. There is no debt. Lee's eyes reflected firelight. There is no contract. There is no paper that says you belong to me. Then why am I still here? The tears came without permission, hot and bewildered. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the vulnerability he usually armored away. Because I want you to be. But only if you choose it. And if I don't? Then I'll have June drive you anywhere you want to go. Tonight. Sherry stared at the smoldering remains, then at the man who'd destroyed his claim on her. Her hand trembled as she reached out, fingers hovering over his before finally, deliberately, settling there. I'm not ready to leave. Lee's exhale carried the weight of something precious and fragile. He lifted her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles with unexpected gentleness. Then you stay as my equal. Not my property. The ashes cooled between them, and Sherry realized she was choosing her cage, but this time, she held the key. The midnight blue gown transformed her into someone she barely recognized, elegant, untouchable, beautiful in a way that made her throat tight. Lee appeared behind her in the mirror, fastening a diamond choker around her throat with surprising gentleness. You'll be a target tonight. His fingers lingered at her nape. Stay close. Why bring me if it's dangerous? His eyes met hers in the reflection, dark and possessive. Because I want them to see you belong to me. The gala glittered with old money and older blood. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across champagne towers and men in tuxedos who smiled with predator teeth. Director Suk watched from across the ballroom, his glare sharp enough to draw blood. Lee's hand rested at the small of her back as he made introductions. This is Sherry Braden. She's under my protection. Whispers rippled outward like stones in still water. Sherry accepted a champagne flute, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. She was raising it to her lips when she saw it, a red laser dot, small and deadly, centered on Lee's chest. Time fractured. She didn't think. The glass shattered against marble as she launched herself at Lee, her body colliding with his as the bullet screamed past. The champagne tower exploded in crystal and chaos. Lee's weight covered her instantly, shielding her as gunfire cracked the air. His men swarmed the balcony, but the sniper was already gone. He pulled her upright, blood splattered across her gown, not hers, someone else's. His hands gripped her shoulders, fury blazing. You could have been killed. So could you. She grabbed his lapels, still shaking. Something shifted in his expression, shock melting into something rawer than gratitude, more dangerous than relief. Lee burst into the penthouse without knocking, his usual composure shattered by urgency. Director Suk is meeting the Iron Lotus at Dock 7. Tonight. Lee was already moving toward his office. Then we end this. I'm coming with you. Sherry's voice stopped him mid-stride. No. You don't own me, remember? She met his gaze without flinching, using his own words as armor. I choose to come. Something flickered in his expression, pride mixed with fear, but he didn't argue further. The dock sprawled dark and industrial beneath fog that rolled in from the harbor like something living. Shipping containers stacked like tombstones, cranes looming skeletal against the night sky. They entered the warehouse cautiously, Lee's hand hovering near the gun at his back, Sherry's heartbeat thunder in her ears. The doors slammed shut behind them with the finality of a trap springing closed. Floodlights blazed to life, blinding and brutal. Director Suk stood in the center of the warehouse, flanked by 6 Iron Lotus enforcers whose weapons tracked every breath. His smile was vicious and satisfied, the expression of a man who'd already won. Did you really think I'd meet you without insurance, Lee? They were herded at gunpoint into a shipping container, the metal walls still reeking of saltwater and rust and old cargo. The doors locked with a hollow clang that echoed in Sherry's chest. Voices filtered through the steel, casual and cruel, burn it when the tide comes in. Lee searched the container frantically, his controlled facade cracking. He found a roof hatch barely wide enough for one person, rusted but functional. He turned to Sherry, his expression carved from desperation she'd never seen him wear. You're going through that hatch. Now. Not without you. I can hold them off long enough for you to escape. His hands were already working the hatch mechanism, metal screeching against metal. And then what? You die, and I live knowing I ran? Sherry grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her, to really see her. He seized her shoulders, and something broke in that carefully controlled facade, anguish bleeding through the cracks. Sherry, I'm begging you. Go. No. Her voice didn't waver even though her hands did. We both leave, or neither of us does. Outside, footsteps approached. Voices coordinating. The smell of gasoline began seeping through the container seams. They had minutes, maybe less. Lee stared at her like she was something precious and impossible and utterly infuriating. His jaw worked, emotions warring across his face, love and rage and terror all fighting for dominance. Then we fight our way out together, he finally said, pulling the gun from his holster. Sherry nodded, her fear transforming into something sharper. She wasn't running anymore. Sherry hauled herself through the hatch onto the container roof, gasping as the metal scalded her palms. The fog had thickened, turning the docks into something from a nightmare, all shadows and muffled sounds and the acrid smell of gasoline growing stronger. Above her, a massive dock crane towered against the sky, its controls accessible via a rusted ladder bolted to its side. Below, gunfire cracked the night. Lee, fighting to buy her time she didn't know how to use. She climbed. Hands bleeding where rust bit into skin, legs shaking so badly she nearly lost her grip twice. But she climbed, because the alternative was burning alive or watching Lee die, and neither was acceptable anymore. The operator's cabin reeked of rust and stale cigarettes, controls labeled in Korean characters she couldn't read. Sherry yanked levers at random until the crane shuddered to life with a groan that sounded almost human. The hook swung wild, and she fought the controls, learning through desperation what each lever did. She swung the massive hook toward the cluster of armed guards. It connected with a stack of containers, the impact creating a domino effect that sent men scattering and screaming. Metal shrieked against metal, a sound like the world ending. Sherry lowered the hook toward Lee's container with shaking hands. He emerged through a gap she'd created, grabbed the hook, and pulled himself free as bullets sparked off metal around him. His eyes found hers in the crane cabin, surprise and pride and something fiercer bleeding through his usual control. Together they maneuvered the crane, trapping Director Suk beneath a suspended container. He writhed like a pinned insect, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. You think this is over? Suk's voice came out strangled, desperate. The Iron Lotus will never stop hunting you. Lee dropped from the hook, landing with predatory grace. He pulled his gun with the same calm he brought to signing contracts. Then I'll send them a message they can't ignore. The shot echoed across the docks, final as a period ending a sentence. June and Lee's men arrived minutes later to find carnage, crushed containers, bodies, Director Sook's execution still smoking. They stared at Sherry as she climbed down from the crane cabin, bloodied and shaking but upright. Victorious. June's voice carried disbelief. She did this? She saved us both. Lee pulled Sherry close, his hands gentler than they'd ever been. He slid a silver ring onto her finger, heavy, old, engraved with his family crest. A dragon coiled protectively around a lotus blossom. You are no longer my guest. You are my equal. My queen. Sherry stared at the ring, then at the man who'd bought her and freed her and nearly died for her. Then let's rule this city together. Days later, they stood on the penthouse balcony as the city glittered below like a kingdom laid at their feet. Sherry wore the ring and a tailored suit that fit like armor. Lee's hand rested at the small of her back, possessive and proud. Any regrets? He asked. She thought of Kelvin, of the parking garage, of believing herself worthless. She thought of ledgers burning and bullets flying and choosing to stay when she could have run. Only that I didn't find you sooner. They stood side by side, untouchable, and watched their empire breathe beneath them. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I'm sure you enjoyed it.